All right, hi everyone. Sorry for the delay. I'm Tatiana. I'm the current women's officer at the union, and tonight we're going to be talking about women in tech. So I guess what I want to look at in this panel is how gender affects the tech industry at different stages of careers. So when you're studying as an undergraduate, when you're moving into the industry, and when women actually take leave and how they get back into the industry after maternity leave and different events in their life. So today joining us for the panel, we have Sarah Drinkwater from Google Campus. Sorry.
Thank you.
We have Matea Yamnik from Cambridge Computer Laboratory, and we have Siobhan Baker from Code First Girls, which is super exciting. So I'm going to ask each of them just to tell you a bit about what they do.
Great. Guys, I think you should maybe come forwards a little bit. I feel like this is we have like a nice intimate crowd, right? So I've got a very atypical background. I love the fact you guys did that right away. Yeah, so nice. In London, they'd be like, no, that's not happening. I've got a very atraditional background in that I've got 2 arts degrees. I was a journalist for a long time. I ran a theatre company, ended up working in social and then founding a few startups and then joining Google to run a team around Google Maps. And now I run a space for entrepreneurs. I'm particularly passionate about diverse founders of all types, arts graduates who work in tech like me, and thinking global. You know, we're based in the UK, of course, right now, but we have campuses now in 6 countries: Seoul, Sao Paulo, Tel Aviv, Warsaw, Madrid. And entrepreneurs the world over want the same things, and increasingly they look like all of us in this room, which I think is very exciting.
Fantastic. Matea?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. So my name is Matea Yamnik, and I'm in the computer lab here at the University of Cambridge. And I'm a reader in artificial intelligence, but originally I was a mathematician and then studied computer science for my master's degree and did a PhD in AI. So I research and look at, actually I'm not so much interested in machines, I'm much more interested in people. And so I study how people use intuitive methods to solve problems, and I try to humanize computers to do the same kind of thing. I'm also very passionate about bringing science closer to the general public, so I often will engage in media and outreach type of activities. And I'm also very passionate in bringing more girls and women into technology. So in 2003, I started a national network called Women at CL, which is Women in Computing, where we support the people who are already in computer science degrees with events from undergraduates to professors, to professors in computer science all over the UK. So yeah.
Excellent. And Siobhan?
I, similarly to Sarah, have an arts background, so my undergrad degree is in arts. Currently doing a master's in philosophy, which is a bit of a shift, but I have been at Code First Girls for 6 months now as the programs manager, overseeing our community courses and events that happen throughout the year across the UK and Ireland. And I came into the Code First Girls community about 2 years ago. So whilst studying my master's part-time, I took their Introduction to Front-End Web Development course and was quite surprised by how much I enjoyed that. I've been someone coming from an arts background, very much around crafts, textiles, very much tactile working, was someone who was very much kind of concerned by the shift that tech was taking, and that the move towards tech and moving away from kind of what I felt were those hand skills, those crafts, and concerned about what impact that was having on the way that we interact with the way that we interact with arts going forward. And was quite surprised when taking the course in terms of how much I actually enjoyed seeing something that I'd built come together before my eyes, and seeing the same level of impact that I could have on code and creating something, and seeing that realized before my eyes. And also then when taking the back-end web development course in Ruby, actually seeing the crossover between that and logic in my philosophy studies, and actually came to realize that there is a lot of potential in tech and in thinking about the way that we can interact with it as we move forward and use that positively to impact our society. So I do definitely have an interest in the impact that arts can have in framing the way that we move forward with how tech, the possibilities that tech has.
Fantastic. So I guess one of the things that has become apparent from hearing from all of you is that none of you took the traditional computer science route through university. So obviously an issue is that with women at university, they are more heavily represented in humanities than they are in sciences, and particularly computer sciences. In the 2014 admissions cycle here at Cambridge, I think only 13.9% of computer science undergrads were women. Why do you think it is that that disparity happens coming into university, and what do you think can be done to allow women to access the skills they need to enter the tech industry while they're at university, while not taking computer science?
I guess I would step back and say there's two issues here. The first one is the number of women taking CS, right? And the second issue is around how we define technology. And I think it's always thought about as this industry over there in the corner, but increasingly tech is everything else, right? Much food is powered by tech, our bus route is powered by tech, the clothes that we wear are often made by machines. I think increasingly it's helpful to think about technology as simply being a tool that we're going to be using in the future for everything we do, whether it's healthcare, education. And to echo Siobhan's point, I think it's really important we get the balance right between staying connected to each other as well. I think one thing to really emphasize around working in tech is there are many, many, many routes in and many jobs in tech, some of which are technical, some of which are not. You know, if I look at entrepreneurs that I know and the teams they've built, you have to have every kind of skill there is. And I think particularly with the rise of machine learning and things like TensorFlow, which is a tool that Google put together, it's easier than ever for less technical founders to kind of plug AI as a tool into their startup. You know, certainly for me, I grew up with my dad's a developer, my three brothers are all developers. I learned BASIC when I was a kid in the 80s, which in that era was pretty unusual.
Yeah.
But I was a very creative kid, and at that era, there was this very strong arts and science divide. You know, you got told you could be one or you could be the other. And for me, being really interested in clothes and art and plays, I was put down that route. So I would take it back to when I look at men and women in CS, I think it's a hard problem. But I think part of it goes back to us understanding that we can be, as humans, many things at one time. You can care about your eyeliner and you can care about writing great code, right? Those things are not in conflict. And the message that I heard a lot when I was a teenager is, you know, blah is uncool. This, you know, there was always this notion of cool, uncool, art, science. There were all these binaries presented to me that I don't really think exist. So if I look at what would really help with increasing numbers in CS, if more women and girls knew the joy of building something, the joy of making something. Like, I'm not a great coder, but even, you know, I've pushed company products live before, and it's the most thrilling thing you can imagine. It's like writing a book. It feels that great. Because there's that sense of creativity and ownership. And I think code is incredibly creative, but we don't hear that message enough, you know?
Yeah.
I think also now that it's true, yeah, we have about 14% of our undergraduates are women, and we are working really hard to attract girls from secondary schools to come and study computer science. We deliberately go out and do outreach activities to state schools around the UK. But I think partly it's also to do with, it's a cultural thing. So if you look into Asia, or if you look into Eastern Europe, or if you look into Italy, surprisingly, perhaps, they don't have this kind of quite as pronounced gender divide in terms of technology. And if you look at how many, and what the attitudes towards sciences and towards mathematics are, is completely different than what's happening in the UK. And, you know, here I've got 3 kids, and I can see in my girls, they're saying, oh, it's so boring to do computer science. I don't want to do that. That's for nerdy boys. And my heart breaks. They've got a mother who's doing computer science day to day, and I show them all the exciting, creative things that they can do with computer science. So I really do think that in order to increase the numbers of girls coming into computing, I think that we need to look very hard at particularly secondary schools and how we teach them. Now, the curriculum has changed now in secondary schools for computer science, and it's a lot better now, and it's not anymore about secretarial skills of how to use PowerPoint or Excel. It's about coding, it's about writing algorithms to solve exciting, interesting problems. And I think Since this is a new development for the last, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, I think it'll take a little bit of time for it to permeate through to the university level. But I really do hope that things are going to change. And of course, yes, now the employers are not really looking just for coders. They're looking for creative thinkers. And you can come to that from any area.
I really echo that. Obviously, running a space of entrepreneurs, we've got 85,000 members, 40% women, many of whom are technical, many of whom are non-technical. And if I look at the paths people take to start their own companies or join a startup, it's so diverse. I can think of one of the most brilliant coders that I know who works for a fintech company that I love. He did a design degree in Spain 20 years ago. He ended up falling down a path and becoming a waiter for 20 years, moved to London, upskilled himself as a coder. And because the interview process he had at the startup was purely code-based, they didn't look at his CV because they don't believe in CVs, which are kind of, God bless startups in their weird ways. He got the job and he's doing amazingly well. But for a traditional company, they might have looked at his CV and said, well, you've been a waiter at Pizza Express for 20 years. So I think there's something about upskilling as you go that if you look at the skills deficit in the UK, we've got almost 1 million jobs that aren't filled and people who really, really, really want to work. I think part of that is we're still using CVs, which I think is a broken hiring system. But also, we should be encouraging people into lifelong learning as well as promoting degrees.
Yeah, and I'd really like to hear from Siobhan, because obviously that's something you guys work with at Code First Girls, is making those skills accessible during university without a degree.
Yes, so we work with women that are, or those that identify as women, I should say, who are aged 18 plus and are either currently studying or have graduated within 2 years. And it's looking at specifically that time where they're ready to work, they're thinking about what they want to be going into career-wise, and maybe might feel that because they haven't taken this kind of traditional route to industry, they've missed out on those skills. They're not quite able to enter into that industry, and actually giving them the opportunity to learn, to realize that this is something they can do, so empowering them with that confidence around, yes, this is something I can understand, I can learn, and that I can upskill myself to be able to enter into, and then encouraging them in that wider skills development and networking opportunity to get them into those roles. And that is, it's really key to look at that age group where they've kind of feel like they've missed that opportunity to redirect, and actually saying, no, it is still possible, no matter what part along your journey you're on, to actually take that step and move into industry.
Your graduates have gone on to like NASA, ThoughtWorks, amazing companies. I just want to say Code First Girls are an incredible organization. I love them.
It's fantastic. I think that one of the big things that I've heard from a lot of undergraduates is that they feel like once they aren't taking a technical degree, they can't get a job at some of these companies that they're looking at. So it's awesome that there's that extra avenue. And I guess
I think it's going to be increasingly more like that, because there's a huge gap there and demand for technically skilled people, and we don't have enough graduates who are wanting to or are able to do that kind of job. And I think that's why employers are looking at creative thinkers, because they can train them in how to use a particular machine learning algorithm. They can train them. These are the sort of skills like we used to learn how to use Excel and how to use PowerPoint. Now they're going to learn how to use one form of deep neural nets or whatever.
That's pretty cool.
Because they are now much more accessible, but what they really want from a person, from the employee, is that they are creative in their problem-solving skills, so they can solve the problems, they can attack or tackle the problems that they need to solve in new ways.
And in some ways, I think the arts background is very amenable to that with a lot of the critical thinking.
Yes. Any degree, in fact, will equip people with diverse kind of problem-solving skills, yes.
I think particularly, we're in the debate chamber right now. I want to point out to great communication. I think one thing that's also helped me, I've managed teams of engineers, despite the fact that I'm not a very good coder. I think one thing that really helps you in technology in general is being a good communicator. Particularly being able to convert technical things into layperson's terms, because your average user is not going to be speaking as technically as your engineering team, and having a conduit between those two worlds, I think, is very powerful.
Fantastic. And I guess looking a bit more past university into the workplace, what do you think workplaces can be doing, should be doing, are doing to make the workplace more welcoming to women and to enable women to build up some of the skills that they may have been discouraged from obtaining earlier in their careers?
I mean, at Code First Girls, some of the work that we do, as well as the courses that we run, is we do work with organisations looking at their hiring practices, their recruitment and retention, and really thinking around what they're putting out there in terms of the advertisements that they're putting out, how they're framing that language. Are they making it accessible to people from different backgrounds to feel that they can apply for those roles? And also thinking about the environments that they're bringing people into, so actually educating their teams and thinking about, various organisations do things like unconscious bias training, and thinking about the way that those teams are set up to encourage women that are coming into those roles to stay in those roles and feel valued and feel that they can actually actively take part and contribute to the work going forward. So I think there is a lot there around encouraging teams as well to understand what the importance of that is, and them having that commitment to driving that forward as well, so that everybody's involved.
I think physical space too, I've got a really unusual job and I run a 7-story physical space. So, when I moved over from Central Google to run this space, I was like, oh my God, I get to A/B test in real time, or what brings a more diverse community in. And when I first joined, when I first moved over to run this building, we had like 18% women, which is pretty standard across all of the tech spaces. And small things we did, we made sure that all of our imagery was very diverse. So we really focused on representing all of our community who looked just like Londoners. We did small things like created a mother's room, did trans bathroom signs, gender-neutral bathroom signs, and began running things like a baby-friendly startup school, a founder of colour breakfast, just small things which explicitly welcomed in different groups. And I think we found within a year that we had a more diverse community because we'd explicitly said, you are welcome here. And I think particularly, we gave ambassador roles to people in our community that we thought were great advocates of different cultures. So for example, with our POC community, which is founders of colour, my team are, all white. We're not the right people to run that. We should have people from the community running that. And I think, particularly with my side hat, which is I also run Women at Google, I'm the chair of that organisation. A lot of our work within that community, everything we do is inclusive. Men are always welcome. I think a lot of these conversations happen in rooms without men, and that's why it's so amazing to see so many guys here tonight. I think it's really important that when you're thinking about hiring practices, it's also about hiring, retention, all the signs you give through the physical space. Every message you're sending out about your company, because when you guys are looking for jobs, you're going to be researching the companies, right? And if you see lots of photographs of old guys, it's not going to be very charming.
So in terms of attracting the undergraduates, we really have an issue with that. That girls just don't apply. So there needs to be something done before they even come to us. But when they do come to us, so this network, Women at CL, we are organizing events actually the events are all open to all members of the department. But we bring in female speakers to present role models. We organize lunches. We organize coffee meetings where it's basically peer-to-peer mentoring stuff going on. We go and visit big tech companies to show what opportunities there are. So basically our aim is to try to retain women in computing once they have decided to enter into computing. I think the active steps need to be taken in order to attract people to apply, diverse people to apply. So that's also in terms of hiring new academic staff. You can't just put an ad out and hope for the best. You really have to actively look for and target diverse groups of people in order to get them to apply. I think that's really very crucial.
And I'd be interested to know, I think the commercial world and academia probably have quite different cultures within them. Do you think that the way women are treated in academia, in technology, is different, perhaps worse, better than how that equality or progression towards gender parity is occurring in the commercial world?
I can't answer that question very well because I haven't worked in the commercial world, so I don't have that kind of first-hand experience. But in our department, I think that most of the time things that are not favorable, or actions that are not favorable to women, they are not intentional. They are because people are just not aware that they should be considering these other groups of people that might have different needs or different expectations even. And I think that we are, for example, we are running things like an unconscious bias workshops for all staff who are working with students. And this culture is changing, even within our department, which I think generally is very open and welcoming, but you know, we are only 10%. We were, not anymore now. We've done very well. Last year we hired lots of women, but it just happens to be that's happened. Or maybe it's a consequence of active targeting. We can't tell yet. But we used to be only 10% academics were women in our department. Now we're probably we've increased by 75%.
That's very exciting.
Yeah, we were 4, now we're 7.
That is
Benefits of
very
small
good
teams,
news.
proportionally good, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, I think that it's this proactive.
I think it's really interesting though, because I've never worked in academia. I've only ever worked in startups and Google, which is not a very good comparison. This is my first big company. And I think one thing that's really interesting is, you know, big companies think about this stuff a lot, right? Particularly Google. I've just come from an event that my Women at community have run called Press for Progress, where the whole afternoon was about how to be an ally for every person in the room, male, female. All of us have groups who can be allies too. And I think what can be frustrating working in a large company is within our sales and marketing teams, we have complete parity. It's 50-50. On the technical side of the company, it's a very different story.
Yeah.
And because the numbers of employees are so big, it's really hard to make a difference. And I think what's been really interesting is working with the hiring teams. You know, I've been giving a lot of guidance because we've had so much success at campus of shifting the balance. The reason I think this is important is the product and technical teams. These are the guys who are building the products that all of us use. And ultimately, if 10 guys build a product that look very similar, you know, if 10 guys from California who are 25, who live together build a product, there are going to be things they naturally miss because they're not their customer. But I think what is interesting is in the last couple of years, you have big companies sharing their diversity data publicly. You know, we led with that, and it was really embarrassing. It was 18% women. And that was not a surprise. I used to work in engineering. That was not a surprise to me. But I think having that awful, embarrassing conversation live, and every large tech company was like, yeah, we're the same numbers. This is bad, right? I think James Damore last year, very emotive, controversial discussion within Google around free speech versus basically good citizenship and not being a jerk to your coworkers. I think all of these painful moments, you know, I think we've all seen the effects of tech clash, right? I think we're all looking at the questions that are being asked of big tech companies. And I think a lot of the changes that are happening right now around gender parity, a lot of those open conversations that start with, you know, a painful piece of data or a painful press story are making big companies think even harder and take even more action.
Fantastic. And so looking within the workplace, I mean, how do you think the gender balance affects the products that come out of these workplaces or the research that we do? I mean, earlier we were talking before the panel about AI specifically and how that data feeds in.
Yeah, so I wanted to bring up this because AI and machine learning is basically, you know, becoming totally ubiquitous now. So we have, you know, phones, we're talking to our phones, they're predicting our speech and our text and our spelling. We are having recommendations about what we want to watch or what we want to buy in the supermarket, whether we should be given an insurance policy or not. You know, it's everywhere, and it's going to continue. It's to be used even more in every aspect of our lives. Now, not having diversity there is a big issue, and companies are starting to realize this, and the lack of diversity or the gender or diversity bias it comes out in two ways. One is in the types of algorithms that are being written. If the teams are not diverse, they will obviously reflect the inherent biases of the people who are building these algorithms. So that's one aspect. So we have to strive to have these teams that are building algorithms as diverse as possible. The other aspect of this bias is the data. So these machine learning algorithms are feeding on data in order to then predict what we might like. And if that data is not reflecting our society, the predictions are not going to be appropriate for every individual. So you can imagine that if you have a black female going to the insurance company saying, can I get an insurance policy in the east part of London for my house? And they use an AI algorithm that was fed on completely different types of data. They might just say no. And
there have been real examples of this in Chicago.
Yeah,
they brought out a really
absolutely.
interesting, the guy who was the chief digital officer there brought out a predictive piece of data that predicted when crime would happen. And what happened is the police were always being directed towards a part of town that was historically African American. And I think that a third challenge there with AI on the startup side, which is what I deal with mostly, is, you know, venture capitalists who invest in startups are treating AI like software 10 years ago. Software 10 years ago, the idea was get to market fast, sell, times 5, etc., unicorn. And with AI, there are a lot more checks and balances that we have to put into place. It's a more complicated proposition.
Yes.
So whenever you see a press story that's like, this algorithm is racist, this algorithm, you know, often that's partly because the training data is bad, partly because the team building it is not diverse enough, and partly because the investors have rushed it to market. So I think there's a lot of really interesting challenges.
But the good thing is that people are starting to be aware of this, so they are. They're putting measures into place also to examine the data that they use to feed these algorithms. And as you said, you know, the companies are trying to diversify their teams. So,
and I think that makes the case for not only when we're talking about gender diversity or talking about diversity in terms of ethnic background, but also in terms of your background in terms of maybe coming from arts or coming from law, and actually being able to anticipate a wider range of people's needs and their interests, and being able to actually build systems and processes, services that are actually going to match that society. So it really makes the case for why people that may not have come from that traditional route to computer science still have value, because they have all these other skills, all these other experiences, and all this other knowledge that they can bring to that.
I'd be curious to know, in your work with Code First Girls, when you see the women in your program creating projects and beta testing, you know, the software they've developed, do you see a difference in the products they create compared to what's commercially available or what men are creating? Do you think there's different kind of thoughts driving that? Or Sarah, in the work you've seen at Google Campus between the male and female teams developing products?
Not hugely, but one thing I've observed in the last couple of years, and this is a personal horse I love to get on, so bear with me. I don't love a lot of the language of startups, you know, this notion of hustle, crushing the opposition, unicorns. I find a lot of that vocabulary very archaic and very dated. And one thing I've observed that's particularly led by female founders is the drive towards companies that make money but also have a real societal impact too. These are companies that I love to back. And we're calling them zebras because they are black and white at the same time. They do social good, they make money, they won't sacrifice one for the other. And I am starting to see male founders launch these kind of companies too. But I see this movement as being very much led a few years back by female founders, partly because they weren't getting the 10x funding by VCs, partly because they had to find a different route to market. So again, it's a case of creativity breeding, you know, constraint breeding creativity, which I think is a good thing. But I'd be curious about your answer on this, because that is a really interesting question.
It is an interesting question, and I think it's one, I can say I have a definitive answer for you on that at the moment. I think what I would say is it's definitely very interesting to see when you have students that are on mixed programs coming from very mixed backgrounds that are all really getting on board with learning how to code and really enjoying that journey and really enjoying realizing a project at the end of that and actually seeing how they come together. And they might be, so they work together on a project, so whilst they're learning how to code, they're actually building something, so they have a website at the end of the course, or they have a web application. And actually, they work together on those in teams, and they might be working with people that are studying completely different subject areas to them, and actually how they come together and they share their ideas and they share their knowledge and build something together and see that grow is really interesting. You know, for example, we recently launched our first course at Goldsmiths University, and a lot of the students from that course were from very different backgrounds. There were some that were studying anthropology, some that were studying design, some that were studying media, and just seeing that all come together and that what comes out of that is really interesting, definitely.
Fantastic. So one other issue that I did want to bring up relating to women in the tech industry is there's a trend of women who leave the industry once they've kind of established a career there to, you know, take mat leave, raise their children, take a few years off, and struggle more so than men do as leavers to come back into the industry. What do you think drives that, and how can companies and universities be more welcoming and better facilitate the return of those women?
I think, okay, so as a childbearing age woman, I've got a lot of thoughts on this. One of which is that one thing that can be hard to understand, one thing that I never understood when I was younger, is that as you go through your career journey, your focus and priorities shift all the time, right? And I think some of those women, some of those men get to a certain stage and realize they don't want to be a CEO. They want to have more balance. They want to focus on different things. I think the second thing is that in general, the way that the workplace thinks about parenthood for men and women is not okay, right? I mean, this is how we keep our civilization going. And you look at America and people go back to work after a cesarean after like a week, which to me is insane. So I think there's a bunch of things here. I think one thing is that, you know, the panel I was on earlier today was a guy talking, you know, the first VP at Google, the first very senior guy who took 6 months paternity leave, which is kind of a big deal. And he was talking about how they designed a program to help them get back to work. So I know that our company does a lot of work around when you come back, you get a buddy, you get regular check-ins. I think for very small startups, that's really hard because obviously if you've got a team of 4 and one person goes for 6 months, that's really tough. I think, so I think one challenge is workplaces still treat maternity and paternity as kind of an inconvenience rather than a fact of life that many people go through in order to have all of us, right? I think secondly, I sense a lot of those parents come back to work and perhaps, you know, I run a baby-friendly startup school, right? So we've had 650 graduates. We had our first exit last year. And this program is a 10-week program where you can bring your baby with you. You start with an idea and you finish with a business plan and like a startup ready to launch. And one thing I've observed through that program is many of these men and women, the primary carers, are really high-flying. They've been spending 20 years at Goldman Sachs or in law or something like that. And for many of them, they go on maternity or paternity leave and they realize they hate their job. So I don't think it's just, I think workplaces aren't good enough at mat and pat leave. I think focus and priorities change. And I think the third thing is for many people, they shift focus after maternity and paternity, and I've observed that with so many of my friends. You know, they come back to work and they're like, oh, actually, I don't care about this anymore. I want to do this other thing. I think where that gets problematic is you end up with an entire VP list of guys because a lot of the women have left. Because a lot of those guys haven't had the time out.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Me?
How does it work in academia?
Yes, I got 3 children. I've taken maternity leave 3 times, and I was I think the first one ever to take maternity leave amongst the academics.
Gosh. Wow.
So I was plowing the field, and
Congrats.
And it was okay because the university is a good employer. So whilst they didn't know what to do with me, I just had to go out and tell them what they need to do for me. So I came back and I worked part-time to start with. And in fact, I worked part-time, 50% part-time for 10 years. And then I increased, and I'm still actually part-time so that I can go and collect my kids from school every day.
Is that 4 days a week, or do you do shorter
No,
days?
I do shorter days, 5 shorter days, yes. Actually, it's
See,
a
this
bit...
is the Scandinavian model. I think more like Germany's just brought in a law where you can do 28 hours a week for 5 years after you have kids.
Yeah,
It's quite logical, right?
Yeah.
Why not?
So what helped me was that the fact that I could have a graduated return, which means that you go in first to start with shorter days, and then you gradually increase. That you can take maternity leave. That we do have decent childcare around here in Cambridge, and and that I can be flexible with my work. So that I can supervise PhD students and undergraduates when it suits me, and do research when it suits me. The difficulty, the real difficulty in an academic job is travel. So when you have small kids, it's very difficult to travel, but most of the stuff, most of the networking, most of the presentation of your work is at conferences, which a lot of them happen overseas. And that's really, really hard. Then, in fact, I still, even now, many years later, I still almost never go to an overseas conference unless it's absolutely necessary, or unless I can bring my whole family with me, which I have done. In fact, I was chairing a big conference in in Portland in the States. And when I said that I will do it, I didn't know that I was going to be pregnant then, and I didn't know that I was going to press the submit proceedings to the publisher on the 2 days before I gave birth. And I didn't know that my baby is going to be 3 months old when I'll be in Portland, opening the conference. And
Don't you think that's a pretty cool... I just think whenever I see a pregnant woman on stage or somebody on stage with a baby, I'm like, yeah, this is cool.
I don't think that
It's a
anybody's
great
ever
role model.
seen a baby.
God, I have.
in the computer science conference. You know?
I just think it's really, like, for mums and dads, we should have more dogs at work, more babies at work. We should just normalize this stuff more. Like, let's get Scandi about it.
But to be honest, I mean, to be fair, things are changing. Now there are lots of men who are working part-time, and you can see them on the playground collecting their children from school. There are lots of men who are, taking advantage of all of these women-friendly policies, but they're actually friendly for everybody. So,
and that was a point that I was going to make. So in terms of what we kind of talk about is things like flexible working, and flexible working isn't just good for women, it's good for everyone.
It's good for everyone.
And especially when working in an industry such as tech, and you have these systems that are set up that allow you to work remotely, that allow you to work from home. So really thinking about, as businesses, as organizations, facilitating that is only going to be good for your staff, because you're actually giving your staff the flexibility to have a work-life balance, and then they are supported returning to work, to stay in work, and have that longer-term commitment to that role. So it's good for everybody when you think about flexible working and actually making that happen.
I'm keeping an eye on the time, so I think if anyone in the audience has a question, now is the time to ask it. If not, I can ask another question, and if you have one, flag me down and I will get to you. All right, yep.
I know it was, because I think it was in the news about a year ago, Uber having a particularly notorious sort of laddish culture at work. Do you think that companies like that are a dying breed in today's world, or do you think it is still something that's quite a problem across much of the industry?
Well, yeah, that's really interesting. So I've got a lot of friends at Uber, and I would say that in general, for me, culture is really important, right? So, and culture, as we all know, comes from top down, bottom up, and everywhere. What I observe with a lot of founders, and this goes back to the crushing it mentality, the hustle mentality, if you believe your own myth, if you're a very young guy who hires people who look just like you, and I've heard this from multiple friends at Uber, I think in their case, they had a culture from the start that perhaps was less friendly. Plenty of my male friends who worked there found it less friendly. And if you look at, they created an incredible tool that I use very often, but if I look at their workplace culture, it gives me cause for concern. And I think increasingly consumers are demanding more than that, right? I think for all of us as citizens and consumers, I'm particularly passionate about responsible tech, whether that means tech that's not addictive, whether that means tech that's built with good culture behind it, whether it means diverse teams. I think, much of Silicon Valley, I go there very often. I came back from there on Monday night. I would actually argue that the UK tech scene in London is more diverse than Silicon Valley. I think Silicon Valley still has far to go to catch up with the UK in terms of diversity of female investors, diversity of female founders, that kind of thing. And I think with Uber, it's been such a public example. They've got a new CEO that I think is very impressive, has done good things in the last month. But if you look at Techlash and the way the papers have a laser focus on technology companies right now, it's a very big lesson for any CEO. You know, it's not enough just to build great products. You have to build a great team, and you have to mean it and work at it, and you can't fake this stuff because it will get found out.
I think also the ethical work is an ethical aspects of what you produce and how you produce it and how you work is becoming increasingly more important for consumers and for employees.
That's actually really true, because I think with Uber I've had so many, I must have known 5 people that have gone there and left, and I think all of them left because they felt, and these are both men and women who felt disrespected and felt that the culture wasn't for them at all.
And I think the importance is realizing that there is still a long way to go. You know, even when we are performing better than we were before, realizing there still is a lot of work to do and continuing to be transparent about that. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I guess the last question I want to ask is, if you were giving advice to a female undergraduate student who wants to get into tech, what do you think the best advice is? What do you think you would tell them about how to gain those skills and how to kind of figure out where to go with their career?
First thing I'd say is to take one of our courses. We actually do run a course here at Cambridge as well. But one of the main things that I say to those of our community members that I have met that are taking our courses is really just to enjoy it and to continue to ask questions, to stay curious, enjoy that journey. There are a lot of resources out there to learn for free, including our own, and tapping into those resources, and also using the opportunity to meet other people. So things like coming along to Google Campus, where you've got the opportunity to meet other people, have conversations, and continuing to share that journey with other people as well. Because I think it's really important to remember that tech is still about people. So it's still about being able to engage with others, being able to think about what your clients want, what they need, and really remembering that at the end of every product or service is an individual. So staying curious, enjoying that learning journey, but also remembering that people are very important, and connecting with people as much as possible. Asking people what they've done, how they found their route to where they are at the moment. Taking people out for coffees. We had our conference last week in Manchester, and one of the founders there was talking about how she just offers to take someone out for coffee, spend half an hour with them, just asking them, you know, what have you been doing? What are you up to? What have you found has been challenging? And really using that opportunity to continue to think about what you want to do going forward.
Yeah, I would echo what you just described. I really think that you should follow your dream, you should follow your passion, because you will find a job or a work environment where you will be able to pursue that passion, and surround yourself with supporters. You know, make connections with people that will support you, will help you on your journey, and take advantage of everything that is out there freely available, and because there is a lot, yeah. Definitely. So, but follow your passion, because you will be so much happier doing what you love.
Everything they said.
I'm just going to add one more thing.
Well, and also, so I went to a really academic university, and I got first and I got distinction at my master's. And one thing I would advise Cambridge undergraduates is try and fail in your early 20s. It's going to be really good for you. The first time, I had a very big failure in my early 20s, and it was really good for my ego, because it made me realize that I was not better than anybody else. I think that's one thing I would advise very soon. The second thing I would advise is, when I worked out I could just call myself a founder and begin something without anybody giving me permission, it was quite revelatory. You can go and do that right away. If I think about the people that I tend to hire, even if they've just come out of uni, they've launched things on the side, whether it's a wine club or an event or like a thing, I think go and start something. There is a community in Cambridge. It's a pretty great one, Silicon Fen. There are lots of investors here. if you're keen to work for a startup, there will be ones locally where you can go and do some work with them. If you want to start your own thing, just try it. It's really, most 95% of companies fail, so maybe that will fail and that can be your big failure, right? So, and then you can go and join a McKinsey or a Google or something like that, and then launch again later.
But there's also the big support
I'm sure.
infrastructure for people who want to start their own startups. So.
And I think to Siobhan's point, it really is all about people, right? So leverage the communities, whether that's a place like Campus that I run, whether it's any of the co-working spaces here, any of the meetups that are here, this community in itself, it's a really great way to meet other people that care about what you care about.
Fantastic. All right. Any other questions? Or no? Yeah?
Thank you very much for sharing this. It was very interesting. Well, I run an organization to promote the role of women in the sciences in Ecuador, actually. So
cool.
The panorama in Latin America is a little bit more challenging than in Europe. We haven't yet achieved many things that, for example, here in the UK, many companies and many governments have already achieved. But when we think about how to tackle the issues that women face, we keep going backwards and backwards, because usually when women reach 18 years old and start thinking about what they want to do, it's already too late. They already come with all these ideas in their minds that math is too hard, that science is for boys, and they are just not interested. It's already too late to try to lure them into the sciences. And so we're thinking about the role of math, how we teach math, how we teach sciences to the kids when they're young. And I was just wondering, what do you think about it? What should we be teaching kids, especially young girls, about the sciences, about math? What should be the approaches?
Yeah, there's so many good companies in this space in the UK. We are very lucky. I love Code Club. They began at Campus a few years back. I'm a massive fan of theirs. They're a network of volunteer-powered coding clubs for after school. Maybe you should meet them and see if you could replicate something in Ecuador. And that's leveraging people like my dad, who's like a 65-year-old coder who literally goes and spends times with really small kids, helping them learn how to write their first code.
Yeah, my PhD students go and help out with.
And these are like tinies. There's also a couple of really interesting startups in this area. So one that I mentored a few years back is called Detective Dot, and it's basically it's a cool little girl, detective of color. And it's a storybook, but it's also an online website. So basically, the storybook is all about explaining, she goes on a science quest, and she learns about carbon or something. And you log into the website, and you're one of Detective Dot's detectives. And you have to solve, it's all anonymized, so you can make friends on there, but it's very safe. And there's something about the collaborative scientific play that I think is really cool. So that's one. There's Technology Will Save Us, who I love. They are a cool hardware startup kit. You can do things like code your own disco bracelet. There's Kano, K-A-N-O, who are an amazing campus startup who basically you can build your own computer to make it home and do simple coding. And lastly, I met an amazing company this morning called Augmentify, and it's a set of playing cards paired with an app. And it's basically, one was about the elements and one was about the periodic table. And with the periodic table, it's things like, if you put your phone over the sun becomes three-dimensional on your phone, and it's and it's the kind of thing where I was like,
I wish we had this when I was a kid.
But aren't you imagining, I think it's partly about empowering teachers, because I think we forget they have a really hard job, they have no funding, things like they're all suddenly being told they have to teach coding, and a lot of them are like, I've never done this myself. I think first of all, empower teachers. I think second of all, work out how you empower parents and get that education outside of regular hours. Because to my mind, if I think about when I was a kid, I loved school. But I learned so much more from my dad, just randomly, just absorbing things from him. He would pick apart radios the whole time. He's a classic 70s guy. And we would solder motherboards together. And I don't know how that sunk into my head, because I thought I spent my childhood writing plays, but clearly I did not, because now I can do that too. So I think there's something about getting kids to play with parents and empowering parents, because I'm unusual in that my parents are very technical, but many parents, if they're over 60 or 50, they might look at this world and be like, ugh. And I think there's a way we can make them feel excited and engaged and help the parents and kids learn together, which is quite cool.
I think also the vocabulary has to change. People saying, oh, this is maths, it's too hard for me, or we just cannot use that kind of language. You hear teachers at schools of other subjects than maths saying, oh, it's too hard it's maths, and you're giving out messages to young kids that maths is hard. And it's not true. Maths is beautiful. you know.
Well,
It's creative.
but
It's
maths and
you need
music,
to change
yeah.
that vocabulary. And also, I would say that at least in the UK and in this kind of culture, which, as I said before, is kind of different to Eastern Europe and Asian culture, for example. I don't know how it is in Latin America, where it's closer to. But I think it's in this culture, I think it's a really important age is somewhere between 11 and 16. I think that's where the focus it needs to be, at least in this country. So I remember my kids, and there's plenty of research actually out there, that by the time they finish primary school when they're 11, and you ask them, can you do this, what are you good at? And you know, there's no distinction between boys and girls. They're all good at all the sciencey stuff, at everything. They're good at everything. There's no distinction in gender. They go to secondary school, and all of a sudden you have this gender divide where girls don't want to do coding, maths is too difficult, and that kind of thing. And so how does it creep in at that age, or why is it so influential at that age? I think so. That's why I would definitely.
I wonder if you could also run things like hackathons as a way to get kids collaboratively working together, and that helps you understand to build a product over a weekend. Hackathons are, you have a theme, you work on it over the weekend, you present on Sunday, and in each team there's a developer, there's a writer, there's all these skills, and that might be a nice way of making it really playable and collaborative.
Yep. And another organisation I was going to mention that we know of is STEMettes, who work with young girls, encouraging them to think about STEM, and they go into schools and they run sessions and things like that. So that might be another organisation of interest to look at. But I do think it is, to echo Sarah, it's about also thinking about parents and making them, getting them interested in encouraging their children to learn from a young age, whether that's specifically young girls, and actually encouraging girls and thinking that's an option from an earlier start, and also increasing the representation, so actually for them to be able to see that this is a career path that they can take, being more transparent about women in these roles, about what they're doing and why it's exciting, and actually for them to be able to see that as a route that they can take as well. I think I saw recently something very simple, but like the Little Miss books, they've now got one which is a Little Miss Inventor. That's something really simple,
really
but that's, accessible for young girls to think.
I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff, right? Lego and Barbie. Like, I feel like these are things that get into kids' homes that the parents can gift them. I think it's just very powerful. Like, I bought my friend's kid, she's 3, and I bought her like a coding caterpillar. And to make the caterpillar run, she had to put it together in like very simple coding formations. She's delighted with it. And like, it lights up. It's just very cute.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, I think that is about time. Thank you everyone for coming. This was a really exciting discussion for me because I love tech and wish I did more with it. So yeah, I really appreciate all of you turning out. Thank you all for coming to speak.
Thank you for inviting.
Yes,
Thank you for coming. Yeah, fantastic. All right.